Hello. Today is the last commentary on current events for this year, in 2025. So this calls for some reflection on the results of the year. And here I actually find myself in a difficult position because there are no results. That is, we've reached a situation where the old model is basically falling apart. And that's obvious. But accordingly, nothing new is taking shape yet. Because the frameworks that were described many years ago, and which were indirectly voiced by Trump, I'm talking about the model of currency zones, and accordingly, Trump's C5 concept. This is, in fact, still just speculation at this point. In other words, this is what you would call a geopolitical concept, which, as we've seen, is practically not being discussed. It's not being discussed for a pretty obvious reason. The environment where this should theoretically be discussed is completely battleship-like, unyielding and rigid. It's dollar-based, or if you prefer, Euro-Atlantic. There are actually a lot of nuances there, but since my main topic is economics, not geopolitics, I won't get into those details. A knowledgeable geopolitician or political scientist could explain this very well. First of all, I'd like to talk about my own results. We've launched a new website for the Kazan Foundation called Kazan.ru. There was a website before, but it was more like a repository where all my texts were stored. All my videos and accordingly some other things as well. Now we've turned it into a full-fledged website for the Kazan Foundation, and I highly recommend everyone to visit and even register there. Very soon, a new pricing plan will be launched, which will be much simpler and clearer than what we have now. Currently, on the old Foundation website, there are reviews, a Telegram channel, books, and so on. In short, go check out and get acquainted with the new website. And there will be a new queue. Most likely we'll launch it before the new year. We wanted to do it earlier, about 2 weeks ago. But the conference, the preparation for the conference, and a whole bunch of other things, and dragged out the timeline a bit. So, for the new year, we prepared a few gifts. First of all, there are books. And here I want to mention that until December 30th, there are discounts on purchasing my autographed books. And we've launched early bird ticket sales for the conference, which will take place at the end of February. The discount is valid until the new year. Again, I highly recommend everyone, because otherwise we'll get a flood of emails, especially a week or two before the conference, all saying, "What should I do? What should I do? And do you have any discounts?" This just happens every year, and I can say that with complete confidence. And therefore, we've successfully launched a special gift service for you. You can buy a subscription, both for the reviews and for the private Telegram channel for your friends for New Year's. I'm really counting on people to wake up and actually do it. But honestly, the gift option will be available forever. So you can do it tomorrow or the day after. By the way, this is really useful for those who are abroad, because to subscribe, you just need to have someone in Russia who has a Russian bank card who will pay and simply send you a QR code. Before, there were issues like, how do I pay in dollars? Now that problem is gone. Now we're getting back to the basic situation itself. So it's already clear that the global dollar system can't keep up. The story with precious metals, especially silver and gold, silver shows that it's absolutely impossible to hold this market because people's desire to move into assets that aren't affected by various kinds of turmoil is very strong. And in general, it's already clear that the Bretton Woods system, which operated for many decades, can no longer maintain this situation. It's absolutely obvious now that new economic models are needed. The only economic model that exists is the one described by me and Andrei Kobyakov in our 2003 book. Currency zones. This model is not being discussed yet, for obvious reasons, although Trump, by adopting the strategy of an energy superpower, as I've already mentioned, essentially disavowed the possibility of the Bretton Woods system continuing to exist. And we need to be prepared for this. That is, the collapse will happen in 2026. But what scenario it will follow is unclear, because the model of currency zones is being considered again. I've already talked about Japan, but that's a separate piece, an element. And accordingly, the neutral zone in Europe, also proposed by Trump, is not happening. It's not just that it's not being implemented, it's not even being discussed. This means that at some point there will be a sharp break. In general, in this sense, it must be said that the categorical unwillingness to discuss, think, and develop will lead to the fact that every time there will be a very acute crisis with the collapse of the old model. And at that moment, some kind of tricky competition will begin. In the end, everything will come back to the schemes we wrote about more than 20 years ago, simply because nothing else comes about naturally. And theoretically, it would be possible to build something different, but for that, you need a colossal amount of resources. And things are getting worse and worse with those resources. I have my doubts that the economic strategy of an energy superpower will be implemented, if only because it already contradicts the concept of currency zones. It's clear that each currency zone will have its own energy superpower. And this is connected to a very simple thing. In reality, the concept of an energy superpower is just a plan. And for the current elite of the United States of America, they are already, in fact, gradually starting to move to Plan B. And for this reason, by the way, I believe that some situations will become clearer soon. And in this sense, the February conference could be extremely interesting. Because already something will start to come to light. For now, the main problem is that the outcomes for 2025 are absolutely destructive. In other words, you can see some concepts taking shape. They've been thrown out there, but nothing constructive is happening yet. On the one hand, it's unpleasant, but on the other hand, well, things like this happen quite often. It just so happened that the end of the year landed right at this point. Right at this not so pleasant, not so clear moment. In any case, I believe that. And the picture that will take shape by February 21st, by 2026, when our Foundations Conference will be held, will be much more clearly defined. That's exactly why I'll be talking about the results of 2025, actually 2 months after the year ends. Because the most interesting thing is where everything will go. And by the way, a fundamentally important thing within the C5 concept. We will be discussing how to deal with today's China, today's Japan, and today's India, for a perfectly understandable reason. And there's another topic of the conference, which, by the way, is currently the most important from a business perspective, because everyone can see it with the naked eye. The problem of marketing at the current stage. What is it? So, how do you sell in a situation of financial capitalism? There are textbooks written on this topic. It's taught, there are tons of gurus and so on. But what does it mean to sell? In the context of this crisis, and I want to point out it started a bit earlier for us, but now it's getting worse in both Europe and the United States. So the situation will be exactly the same here. Exactly the same. What is marketing under these new conditions? That's a fundamental question. What does it mean to manage a company at this new stage? That's a good question, because the logic that you should hire specialists from the market is great. It's clear. It's convenient. There's just one problem. Under the new conditions, there won't be any specialists on the market. Not a single one. At all. They were taught something else, in different conditions, in a different model, in a different structure. And that means either you will manage things yourself. I mean that your hired managers will be completely inadequate. By the way, many years ago, when I gave a lecture on how to do business in a declining market, I explained that the main losses don't come from the economic situation, but from management mistakes. Now just imagine that your entire management team will be making mistakes. And not because they're jerks, bastards, idiots, or anything like that. It's because they were taught a completely different model, which is now changing radically. So that's another topic we'll cover at our Tiverets IFN. What is management in the modern world? In short, life is going to be incredibly interesting for us. And I, for one, think I'll need to release commentary on current events fairly often, since most likely the frequency of political events will accelerate, although many of them, they represent certain interests. Well, for example, it's absolutely clear that the emergence of the so-called Kozak Plan, the attack on Ukraine and Kupiansk, and some other circumstances were coordinated. And, well, the not-so-successful Direct Line as well. They were coordinated and were supposed to. They were supposed to produce some kind of result, but that result didn't happen. I won't get into it now. It's a political question as to why it didn't work out. But this also shows that the people who prepared all this, as you can imagine given the scale of coordination, are serious people. But even they, generally speaking, are no longer able to control the situation, more or less. And this means the inevitable weakening of these people in the very near future. That's an objective reality. You know, even a pro can miss the mark. That's a fundamentally important point. Well, that's basically where I'll wrap things up. This is my pre-New Year commentary. I wish everyone a happy upcoming New Year. I wish you all success. I really hope that my viewers, so to speak, won't be affected by any troubles, or if they are, it'll be to the smallest extent possible. And once again, let me remind you, visit the Kazin.ru website, the Kazin Foundation website, and check out my public Telegram channel, since the New Year's gifts are still available until the holiday. Thank you. I appreciate your attention.